It's time for episode 100 of The Crisis Show here on Google Hangouts, on YouTube, and wherever else you have this link around the world. Good afternoon, good evening from New York. Tonight we're going to talk about emergency management and business continuity, and we're going to hook that topic to the EF4 tornado that hit Illinois on April 9th for educational purposes. My name is Rich Klein. I'm president of Rich Klein Crisis Management in New York, and I'm so pleased to have as my guest on this 100th episode, probably the best friend we have on the Crisis Show since we started a few years ago. His name is Mike McKenna, the founder and CEO of Team Solutions in Texas. Hey, Mike, how are you?
Hi, Rich. How are you? Good to see everybody, and congratulations on your 100th episode. Glad to be a part.
Thank you, and you've been a big part of that success. So we're grateful to have you again on this occasion. So, Mike, I because of your expertise in this area, I thought it would be good because we haven't done a show in a while on emergency management. You've been great on those past episodes, and I thought because of this tornado, there's a lot of good material in this incident that we can talk about, both from an emergency management side, business continuity side, and communication side. So what I like to do, first of all, for our guests' value, is to play a couple of video clips to set up the piece. And the first one we're going to play is a Weather Channel clip that in the aftermath of destruction. So we're going to show that first, and then Mike's going to talk a little bit about both of these clips.
Here in Fairdale, Illinois, it's a site of destruction with one of the most powerful tornadoes to ever hit this county, striking late on Thursday. We know now that 2 people lost their lives, as many as 11 people have been injured. Search and rescue ongoing throughout the day, and crews going through buildings just like the one behind me in hopes of finding anyone that was unaccounted for. Latest word is that they believe that everyone now is accounted for. One thing they are doing, though, is they continue work inside the town with dogs just to triple check to make sure that every little last corner has been touched in this town. The tornado came through and damaged what we know now is every single building in town and leveled as many as 18 different homes. The National Weather Service on hand surveying the damage, hoping to have their assessment as to the path length, width, and intensity of this tornado. The governor also declaring a state of emergency. That's the very latest here in Illinois. I'm meteorologist Mike Bettis.
So, Mike, I was just reading some of that. I want to definitely get your feedback on that. They said 70 buildings were destroyed or damaged in Fairdale, and another 50 buildings were hit in nearby Rochelle, which we're going to go to in a moment with another clip about that restaurant where people were rescued. So, Mike, what did you tell me a little bit about what you saw? Are there any observations that might be helpful for families and businesses in the aftermath of such an event?
Absolutely. First off, it looks like it's a full court press to get help up there. I did not respond. I don't know anybody directly that did respond, so my observations are limited to just what I saw in the news clip. Certainly, I'm not passing judgment on folks beyond that. There's a lot of moving parts and pieces that are involved in that first reactionary phase of a disaster. Even though they might have had a little bit of warning to get into their shelters and whatnot, there is a reaction period, and it's not until they can get their arms around the problem before they can move into the managed phase of that response. So whoever fed that reporter information seemed like they did a pretty adequate job of explaining what the objective was, and that is what I would call doing the most good for the most people, but it's identifying where all the unaccounted people are. One of our number one priorities is life. The number one priority is always going to be life safety, starting with the responder, the teams, the individual, the teams, and then ultimately the victim. And so that's drives number one, and that's what they were trying to do, it sounds like, is making sure that everyone was accounted for and moved from their bad place into hopefully a better place. While that was going on, it appears that there was the restoration of power, which is another priority, but one of the cautionary notes, and I'll tell you kind of how we address that in a moment. One of the cautionary notes is when you have, on one hand, people that are trapped inside of a building or a house or in a car, and there are down power lines, when they start restoring power to an area, which is obviously part of the infrastructure, it has to be done very carefully, because when those power lines are re-energized, it it poses an additional risk to the responders that are searching a block or two away that may come in contact with some of those down power lines, or a house that has some exposed wiring, etc. So the assumption is that they have put together a unified command and an emergency operations center that puts all those response organizations in the same place to work through some of those potential friction areas. In that case, it would be public works, rescue, search, fire, hazmat, medical aid, this sort of thing in the same place.
Okay, well, thank you for that. We're going to now show another clip. This clip is from the Chicago Sun-Times, in which 12 people were rescued after a restaurant in Rochelle, Illinois, was leveled by that tornado. And this is called Grubstaker's Restaurant. So, Mike, I'm going to play that clip. And I know we did a little bit of this in our warm-ups, and you had a chance to look at it. So I'd like to hear your observations after this. These people who are rescued talk about what happened. So let me pull that up.
In a restaurant, the back in the kitchen with another couple guys, and when I saw that tornadoes arrived pretty close to the building, then I was thinking with the customers, tried making the people safe, and took the girls to the basement for another people. With 12 people, 30 people right in the basement. Everybody okay, so everybody's scared and private, but we okay in the basement. Yeah. I get so nervous and scared, and for that moment I don't know what to do. So thanks to God, everything will be fine. But for that moment, this kind of little never happened this to me in my life, that first time. A lady, they come when you hear, so she very afraid to go down and said, no, you got to go down. And then I grab it and I push down, and like say a few seconds later, this part right here, all the walls fall down. So when I not even see, when I sit down, those crazy dust and gravel over, in my head. And,
inside to the restaurant with my son and 12 other people. All of them got to the basement and we're safe, all of us. And I'm glad. I can't even explain that. It was fast, it was quick, it was dark, it was scary, it was miserable. I feel a little bit better, but I wish it's still a dream. I'm dreaming and I gotta wake up, but this is not happening.
Okay, a little noisy there. Let me turn this down. Okay, sorry about that. A little technical difficulty on that one. Mike, but yeah, you saw that clip originally too. What were some of your observations? And also maybe you could tell us a little bit about what goes into that kind of rescue when you have a collapsed building, because of course we've seen these across the country in the news very often, not just in tornadoes. We've seen collapsed highways, recently one out west, and now of course this one. So help us here.
Yeah, sure. Well, bravo to the quick-witted folks there that took everyone into a subfloor or the basement in order to take them out of harm's way. One of the alternatives that sometimes people will pursue is to run into their vehicles to try to outrun the tornado. So we haven't heard anything of that, which is good, because that Mother Nature usually wins that battle. So the fact that they were in a basement is a good thing, and they're going to be relatively safe. It may not be comfortable, as I think she said, it was miserable and that sort of thing. But the alternatives of being caught up in an EF4 certainly much worse than being stuck in a basement. The other thing that she said and I believe she was the owner of one of those restaurants,
right?
That she said that she needs to wake up because it was a bad dream, and I didn't catch that the first time I saw the video, but I did the second. And one of the things that tells me, as a business owner, is that you have got to think through the worst case scenario within reason of what could happen. They're certainly in a vulnerable area for these tornadoes this time of year. And so none of them that are in these interviews woke up that morning expecting to be on the news later that night talking about how they were impacted by a tornado. People don't normally start their day that way. That's pretty catastrophic thinking. However, we must visualize that it certainly could happen, and that forms the foundation of coming up with a sensible plan. And I think without that, we're going to be a little bit adrift after that. And I don't know what other decision making she was forced to make there, but it appeared from her comments that she was not mentally prepared for being in that situation. And I think that's a troublesome place to be for business owners and decision makers like that.
Yeah, and that's a great transition for what I want to talk about next. You've made a good point on your blog at Team Solutions. You have a blog called 3 Steps to Survive a Disaster of Any Kind. And I'll put that up while you're talking about, but maybe you could talk about some of these things, because one of the things I've learned from you, Mike, is that whether we're talking about a family situation or we're talking about a business situation, the things to do are very similar, right? And so maybe you could talk about how they're similar and where they may be different. So let me first of all pull that up on the screen so people can just get a quick glance at your blog. But
Sure.
Go ahead.
Well, those people that have heard me drone on and on in the past know that I'm pretty fond of quotes. And so one of the quotes that I'm fond of references that even a good plan is worthless, but the planning process itself is indispensable. I think we've got to wrap our brains around that it's not just a plan that is the end game. It is the planning to survive the disruption is the end game, and that's done in a couple ways. And again, the article that you're referencing, I mentioned, I have several of them that address this type of thing on my site. Starts with the concept that we must allow ourselves to think through that if this were to happen, I'm going to zig, and then I'm going to zag, and then I'm going to push this button and pull that lever. If we don't have the mental choreography to take those steps, then we're not going to have the presence of mind and the serenity required in order to make purposeful and well thought out and logical decisions. So it's that first step, even though it sounds very Zen, it really is true. And it's that staying calm and breathing can only be a product of saying, you know what, I've thought through this, and here we go. The second part is understanding what the priorities are. And one of the things that I'm spending a lot more time on these days is helping agencies understand the difference between search and rescue. A lot of times, even one of the reporters referenced the rescue phase and rescuing people, but we don't rescue somebody until we can find them, and we don't find them until we search for them, and we shouldn't search for them unless we have an idea of what happened, what we're trying to accomplish, where the greatest amount of good is that we should spend our energy on, etc. And that part is that size up and that reconnaissance. And so stay tuned on my site, because I'll be announcing more services relative to that going forward. But as I mentioned to you before, Rich, and to the audience, protecting life is always number one. If we go to a disaster and you and I are out there trying to help others and you and I get hurt, then we've taken an unknown number of people impacted by this disaster, and we've added now you and me to it. So we don't want to make things worse. So we want to make sure that we take steps to manage ourselves first. And then we start to stabilize the incident, and then we go through the restoration process. And all those things are easy for me to sit behind a computer in a climate controlled room to talk about. But the reality is, we have to train to get to that point, and the training is departmental, but certainly we've got to go through the tactical steps of learning the situational awareness, the techniques, the tactics, in order to respond safely, in order to actually do the most good for the most people. So that article, to your question, was kind of a summary of what I just said.
Well, thank you for that. One of the things that we've talked about, Mike, very often on the show, and I want to reiterate it here, is business continuity. For those, we often on the show where our audience is business, it's nonprofits, it's government officials. But I know when we talk about business continuity here, it seems to me, and you and I talked about this on the pre-show, that let me give an example, for instance. So we had this cyber attack on Sony, and I saw a great piece on 60 Minutes on this. For those of you who haven't seen it, check it out. It was a great piece about the hack of Sony, and that's been a wake-up call, much like the data breach at Target and other companies were in recent years. companies are paying attention to this. But Mike, you made a great point, and we looked at an article about business continuity and cyber, and it's. I think what you said to me was companies are obsessed, as they should be, and be concerned about their data security, but they're missing the larger picture. So can you elaborate on what you told me on the pre-show about that?
Yeah, I will tell you, it's certainly a hot button for me. I have dealt with far too many companies. There are far too many companies. I feel confident of this, that put most of their resiliency and continuity efforts into the restoration of their digital network. And in fact, that's what most. If you were to, and again, I'm speaking to the world there. If you were to Google business continuity and disaster recovery, 99% of all your articles would deal with the restoration of a data connection of some kind. No question, in today's digital age, that's a required aspect, but it is absolutely oblivious to the realities of a disaster that far exceed the impact made by a simple data interruption. If you and I are working in the same building and we have, and we're trying to use our computers to communicate with our customers, and we're hit by a tornado, I can assure you the least of my troubles are going to be whether or not I can send an email and backup data and that sort of thing. Again, I'm not minimizing the importance of that, but I think it is secondary, I guess, lack of a better word. It is secondary to your life, to my life, which maybe I can't even come into work that day to send that email because the roads are down, or because, and here's the important one, and maybe my own house, my own family have been impacted. And so then you're asking your employees to make a decision. Am I going to protect myself and my house and my family, or am I going to come into work and send an email to your customer? And most people, reality is, most people are going to take care of themselves and their family first. The other interruption of the utilities, interruption of, again, the roadway, the lack of infrastructure, lack of water, lack of healthcare, lack of repair services. I just think it is foolish to limit your training and your focus to just the interruption and the recovery of your data services.
That's a great point, and it's something that I talk about in my business as well, Mike, so I'm glad you raised it, which is you have to prepare for a wide variety of scenarios. And even if you're talking about natural disasters and their impact on your company, like we are today, there's so much more than just data redundancy, for example, or offsite central command and replicating your business processes somewhere else. So that's a great point you made. There's so much more to it than just the data. So what are some tips you would have in terms of, I mean, I talk about in my business, the 3 key timelines in a crisis, Mike, and you know they're the before, during, and after. And you and I often get the call in the middle of a crisis and say, help us. And especially in your emergency management, that's obvious. But on the business continuity side of your business, you and I would like to get in earlier to help people, to help them prepare better to help them mitigate these kinds of diseases, right? So maybe you can talk a little bit about how you educate your clients about that.
Well, and for those people watching, I can tell you that I don't take a lot of work during and after a crisis. It is too problematic. So I tend to want to focus with the companies that have the wherewithal, that want to plan on the front end. Trying to help someone manage through a crisis, that's a totally different business. So really the before is where it all is. And one of the terms that's popular in emergency management is all hazards. And that implies, just by definition, it's every hazard that you can imagine. We've talked before about things like volcanic eruptions, and we've talked about power outages and that sort of thing. And not all of those are going to be super relevant to you. I know you've had a lot of that wet stuff that falls on the ground that starts to freeze. What is that called up there? I think you call it snow or ice or something.
I haven't seen it in a while, so I don't know. I don't want to know.
We don't have a lot of snow. We do have a little bit of ice, though.
We come from the land of the ice and snow. One of my favorites, yes.
Right. Especially so the hazards that are going to be facing you and your clients in the Northeast are going to be a little bit different than the hazards that are facing me and my clients in the South, for example.
Right.
But nonetheless, acknowledging that any hazard could end up interrupting our business, I think, is where it starts. And then it's going through a very purposeful process to identify which of those hazards are going to cause us the most pain, and then what can we do to mitigate that pain. That starts with, I think, I know the institutional will of the decision makers, because if somebody is just wanting to put together a plan, then when that tornado comes through, or the hurricane, or the truck runs to the front door in an accident, a fire, that sort of thing, that plan that you hold up is not going to do you a lot of good. So it's the institutional will of the person that says, you know what, I don't want my company to be interrupted for longer than it has to be. So we're going to put in the culture required that empowers everybody to get this entire company, including them individually, to get to the far side of this disruption. So again, I realize some of this sounds very Zen-like, and maybe it should be, that it's an initial attitude, and it's the intestinal fortitude. And if those things are in place, then everything else becomes somewhat academic, to go through the steps to identify, how we navigate through any disaster in order to get to the far side in one piece.
Yeah, I want a couple of comments on. Thank you for that. First of all, you mentioned just a moment ago about, we have snow up here and you have tornadoes down there, or hurricanes. But what I've noticed, in recent years, whether this, climate damage or not, or from environment, I mean, it's clear that we're seeing a lot of severe weather. We had Superstorm Sandy up here, hurricanes down south, major fires out west in the United States. We've had Jane Jordan Meyer, one of our guests, talk about major brush fires in Australia. And for those of you watching, the show has been seen in at least once in 148 countries. So every continent has their set of problems. But I think there is a common thread, Mike, and that is that every business, every family needs to prepare for these kinds of scenarios. Whether it's an ice storm here in the east, northeast, or tornadoes and hurricanes in the central and south and west. And even though the weather patterns may be different, for instance, a tornado is more sudden, you can't plan for them as like you can plan for a hurricane, for example. The things that you and I teach, Mike, the things that people can do in advance are the same. So the first thing I would say is make a list of the hazards, and you could start with natural disasters. And we just talked about a few of them right here. And once you make that list, you could start out, okay, how are we going to respond as a company or as a family to these incidents? In my business, I talk a lot about the crisis communications component. So if you're a government official or a CEO, we help you learn about how to communicate with your critical audiences online and off in the immediate aftermath of such a crisis. But you don't have to wait until the crisis hits to come up with those talking points for that press conference or that press briefing.
Right.
What Mike and I talk about all the time. This is the time when you're not in the middle of a natural disaster. You're not in the middle of an active, God forbid, a workplace violence incident. You're not in the middle of a disease outbreak or an earthquake or a fire or terrorism. There's plenty of time to prepare for this. And Mike, as you and I know, companies don't do enough on the front end, as you say, which is a great word, on the front end to plan for these things. And it's not just a piece of paper that sits on a shelf. It's a fluid document that's easy to understand, that goes throughout your company. And in that document should be most importantly, the actions that need to be taken, the people who are responsible for those actions, and then also the messaging, the communications component of it, online and off. And that's my short summary. There's a lot more to it, obviously. But feel free to pick up on some of that. We're both passionate about it, I know. So.
Right. Well, a couple of things, and I think we should circle back to look at some of the recent, public statements made by some of the leaders that are trying to communicate with their populace. One of the challenges I think that people, and your list was extraordinary, Rich. I mean, it really outlines what everyone should be doing, and I'm hoping people will pause and go back and write down what you're saying, and to get that transcript of your list of how to prepare and when to prepare. I found that one of the impediments to people that want to prepare is they see those lists and they get intimidated, and they believe that, oh my gosh, I've got to come up with this extraordinary gap analysis and threat assessment and all these mitigation plans. And I would submit that is more on the 90% solution. I don't know that we're ever going to be 100% prepared for all eventualities, because there are those outlying events that are very difficult to prepare for. But the 90% solution is going to be everyone's trained up. You've got guidance documents everywhere. You've got tools, equipment, places, people, things. All of that stuff is squared away, and that may be ideal, but that takes time and money, and obviously the institutional willpower. On the other end of that spectrum, and this is what for people that are intimidated about getting to that 90% solution, I would say to you, 1% solution is still better than zero. So if you're sitting there on your hands and you're thinking, oh my gosh, I'm going to die, then you're really not helping yourself or your family or your business. But if you can get even 1% of the way towards that 90% and say, you know what, I'm going to start to conceive that something big, bad, and ugly can happen, then you're on the way. And then the 2% would be, I'm going to have an open discussion with the people close to me about what I can conceive possibly happening to us. Now you're 2%. And then 3% is, you know what, I'm going to make sure that I have everyone's cell phone number and texting information updated in my phone for all of my family. Now you're 3% of the solution. So I think that it doesn't have to be an intimidating process, even if your family, because of time or money or whatever, only gets to 25% of the solution. You're still a lot better off than you're not. So to those people that are kind of
right, Mike, that could be a lifesaver. Just like you said, that getting to
absolutely.
Right.
Yeah,
keep
absolutely.
That point. Yeah. The obsessed with perfection.
Process. Yeah. It's easy for you and I to be up here having done this for a while to kind of espouse that you get this document and you plug it in here and you teach this person and you're good to go. But we have to crawl before we can walk and walk before we can run. And I would encourage those people that are watching. Again, it applies to both individuals and businesses that you're not going to be the great orator in front of your 5,000 employees and stakeholders telling them how to respond to this crisis overnight. You've got to start with the small things, and that's watching the show is a great start. Telling your friends about it, practicing in front of a mirror, all those things are on the way to being one of the great crisis communicators like my friend Rich Klein.
Thanks. That's a good point. Yeah, and I would just add one of the things I forgot to add before, Mike, is that you have to have a document. Training is so key. Top exercises. One of the things that I do, and I'm sure you do it too, Mike, you go into a company and you analyze where the weak points are, and then try to help them. First of all, before you're trying to solve them, identify what they are. And a lot of people don't want to hear that the first time around. They have those holes in their program.
Yeah. Right.
But
I've learned that it is that when I mentioned intestinal fortitude, that's the person that wants to be better. And those are my clients. As I have matured as a business person, I've learned to stay away from the people that just want to paper their walls, with plans, because it's a lose-lose. I don't associate with companies like that anymore. But if somebody says, you know what, I want to be told where my gaps are, and they really want to be told, hey, we got a deal, because I can tell you what your gaps are. And then you've got to decide whether you want to approach it a la carte or whether you want to do it on your own or you want to do it with help on how to get from that 50% solution up to the 80% or whatever you're trying to accomplish. So it's a different kind of customer.
Yeah, and let me ask you about that. Do you sense, and I'm just wondering from your business, that smaller companies or mid-sized or big companies are more responsive to this? Do you have any data on that, anecdotally even, who are more open to admitting that there's problems and working on them? Or so maybe there's some industries that you work in, Mike, that because of the nature of the work, they understand this better.
Yeah, fair question. This is where we kind of live with our own reality. And my reality is that I don't pursue, target, or work with a lot of humongous companies. My sense, kind of empirically from a distance, is that they're broad enough that it's kind of, well, here's the term that I use in some of my search classes. It's called social loafing. And social loafing refers to when a bunch of us are trying to perform the same task, my individual level of output is going to be lower because I got a guy to my left and a gal to my right that I'm going to think they're going to be putting in greater effort. So if you think about a game of tug of war, and you have 2 people on the A side and 5 people on the B side, the 5 people on the B side are not going to be pulling as hard individually or collectively because they're all thinking the other person's going to carry the weight. But the 2 people on the A side are going to put in more effort because they know that if they don't, the team is certain to fail. So that social loafing, I sense, happens a lot more in the large companies because there's a belief, however real or perceived, that whatever calamity impacts them is going to be absorbed by the sheer mass of the company.
Great point. Yeah.
So I'm not sure that that's maybe part of that's true, to be honest with you. So, and on the other end of the spectrum, like let me think about a guy. He's the manager of a mattress store. Okay, and I've known him kind of socially on and off through the years, and he knows what I do, and I know what he does, and he really wants to do better at his job, managing his. He has two locations of the furniture store, but the ownership, they're a family-run business, and they are, up at dawn racing. It's like the gazelle trying to outrun the lion, and I think it's an area of interest to have a little better preparedness plan, but it is not a priority. And so the very small, almost a micro level company, while they probably need planning more than most, I think it's a scaling issue. They don't have enough people to delegate. They don't have time in their day, or they don't make time in their day. So it's a little bit kind of by the seat of their pants. So it's that mid-range, I think, where I tend to do most of my work. Something larger than a micro business, but something smaller than the mega business.
Right. That's very interesting. I just want to add some quick thoughts on that part of it. As you know, Mike, on the show, we've done a lot of case studies, and very often I am continually surprised that some of the biggest companies with the most resources still make the same kind of crisis management in terms of actions mistakes, as well as communication mistakes. And when I say to myself, well, shouldn't they know better? Haven't they learned from the other companies of their size? So it's a very interesting point you make about the companies. And I think you're right that the other companies may not have the resources at all, or may not think they're big enough to be concerned with them. But I'll give you a quick example. You may have read about this horrible gas explosion in Manhattan, which was actually very close to where I used to live, in a place called Stuyvesant, the East Village of Manhattan. And this was on 7th Street on 2nd Avenue. There were some contractors playing with the gas lines, and it blew up a restaurant and 3 buildings in the neighborhood. Just a horrible story. But again, you have the impact of the businesses around that. This is just another example of how you could be impacted. It may not be your location that gets hit by a gas explosion or a natural disaster. It could be a few doors down, but thereby severely impacting your ability to do business and to communicate, because certainly you're part of the story regardless. If you're a few doors down, you're still part of the news story. You're still part of the interest of the public. And you have to be prepared on both what actions you're going to take for the safety of your employees, but also as a business owner, no matter what size, the communications component of it, right?
Right.
So
that's an outstanding point, Rich. We talk sometimes about the supply chain, that if I'm selling widgets, that I need to have the parts and pieces delivered to me. And if one of those doesn't show up because of a tsunami in Japan, it may impact my entire supply chain. But I think the cousin of that scenario would be what you're talking about. And I think it's really important that we emphasize that community, we live and buy by the people and the things that are around us. The gas leak is a perfect example. There was one here locally to me over the weekend, and a friend of mine is one of the battalion chiefs that had to go and respond to that or manage that. And it was one basically hazmat leak that they had a very hard time putting their arms around, and they ended up evacuating a bunch of families and homes in the area, and that area kept widening. And when you're starting to displace people, now you're talking about someone, let's say a family or a small business that's operating within that hot zone, that maybe they're completely squared away. They've got all the planning in place. They're completely prepared, but then they get a knock on the door that says, I don't care who you are, you got to leave, because this place is now a threat for explosion or whatever. And so you're going back to your point, very, very relevant. It's not just planning for you, it's planning for the choices that are made around you that may impact you. That community impact is extremely important. The flip side of that coin is that, let's say you do have a recovery plan. Let's say you're not forcibly evacuated, but you just have a window blown out and you need it, or the door broken and you need it replaced so that you can go back into business. The challenge there is trying to think ahead, is that Joe's lock service and window repair, their business is impacted and they can't show up to your place to fix your business. So Even though you may be squared away, the resources and the infrastructure around you may not be in place to take out your trash, to fix your glass, to pump gas in your car, etc. So excellent point about the community impact.
Yeah, just a quick addition to that, Mike. Certainly, I'm just thinking about this explosion, for example, but you have first responders and you have law enforcement roping off 10, 15 blocks, let's say, like in this case. Even if your company didn't have a window blown out, maybe not have had any damage, but what do you do then? So again, that goes to business continuity. That's for another show, more about getting back on your feet. But these are things you have to think about. Do you have an online business to get you back on, to replace your lost foot traffic, let's say? I'm just thinking hypothetically about these things. But yeah, and the other thing I would add to that, and this is something we see. I watch a lot of news conferences in the aftermath of crises, as you know, and we do a lot of those on the show. One of the most important things you need to do is again, like I said earlier, planning ahead. Well, knock on the doors, know who your neighbors are, and that goes for families in a neighborhood and businesses in a neighborhood, because you don't know when you're going to need their help. So it's important to know who those people are long before a crisis hits, and maybe have a brainstorming session with a business owner down the block, and say, hey, well, could you help me? And let's exchange numbers so that if something happens, we can get in touch with each other and help each other out.
That's part of the plan, is resource sharing and allocation. If you can, co-locate with somebody down the street, that it may not, it may be the lawnmower repair place, and you're a dentist, but is there something that you can do to support your business in another location while yours is being is inaccessible? Yeah. Excellent point, Rich.
And I think on that, we'll start to wrap up. Was there anything else for the area of you, Mike, that you wanted to add about what we talked about? And folks, for those watching, I know we covered a lot of ground here. We're trying to talk about two very big issues, but they could be looked at in a very narrow window as well. But we want to give you some things to think about today on the show. But Mike, any other final thoughts before?
Buy low and sell high. I think that's one piece of advice I would give your viewers. So I haven't always got that right through my life. So, you're right. I think you have so many excellent points that you made today, Rich. I want to try to draw on a couple of them. The comparison to that little incidents can teach us a lot about big incidents and vice versa, I think is really relevant. Everything we talk about on this show, and not just through the filter of emergency management and crisis response, sometimes it's through social media, sometimes it's through other filters. All of those are very applicable to feed that desire to respond effectively to an all hazards type of crisis. Whether it's the series that you did on the General Motors recall and the rest of that. As an honored participant on your show, I think it's been a fantastic journey for me so far in those 100 shows, for the number that I've been able to be on, to not only engage with you and some of your other guests, where I walk away learning a little bit more, but also as a viewer of your show, when you have other guests on, to be able to watch and to learn. That not only helps my business and my family, even though I would be considered a practitioner in emergency management, I don't walk away from your shows, regardless of what the topic is, without putting something new into my toolbox. So again, just to kind of put a fine note on my role in these 100 episodes, I think that you have done an excellent job of bringing all of us in at different times to speak to these large issues that gives us lessons for small issues, and to speak to small issues that give us lessons to respond to large issues. So bravo for that.
Thank you so much, and that I really appreciate it very much. And I am very lucky. We've had so many guests from around the world appear on the show from so many continents, but also so much brain power, if you will. Right. So many different issues. And so one of the things I want to do now, while we close out the show, since this is the 100th show, is tell our audience a little bit about what we're going to be offering very soon, probably the next month or so. I had this thought that I want to do something when hitting 100 shows. We've always given the information on video away for free, and it's been a great educational resource. There are a few colleges that use the show for educational purposes, advanced public relations classes, for instance. And so we're putting together a crisis show audio library. I've started to, as they say, rip, Mike. They're ripping the audio feed from the library. and we're going to create a package product. It's starting to take shape, but basically it's going to be 100 episodes, probably more than 100 hours of education just like this that started in June 2012 and hasn't ended here, but this is a nice point to this library is going to be 100 episodes, just a nice number. So we decided, and for those of you watching, if you want more information, I did a little blog post about it at richkleincrisis.com. And there is a sample there from a colleague that you and I respect, Mike Felix Nader. I just happen to have that clip up as well. But there's other, also if you go to this page here, there's some sample clips that includes many of those guests that you and I just talked about. We have a highlight reel, and then some other things that I've talked about. So yeah, you can look at the videos, of course, but we want to make this available for audio, of course, with the where we are mobile today, Mike. People want to be able to listen to the stuff on iTunes, on their headphones. 10 years ago, we would have said a CD player.
Right.
But I think audio only, people can listen to it while they're driving as well. Hopefully not talking on their phones, listening to this good education. Right. So this will be available through my website, as well as our the Crisis Show Facebook page, which is facebook.com/The Crisis Show. So look for updates there as well, and on my website, and also at www.thecrisisshow.com. And I also just want to close out with just show you Mike's website, which has been redesigned recently and looks great. Mike's got a lot of products here. You definitely should take a look at it. I just downloaded this card here, preliminary damage assessment pocket card, and I'm learning a lot from you, Mike, getting caught up.
Right.
So take that's team-solutions.us for those of you watching. So again, for those of you out there, thank you so much for watching. We're let me just bring myself back here a little bit. Thank you so much for watching. We hope you'll continue to watch, and we hope to get to 500 episodes. Our colleague Shell Hulse, by the way, Mike, I think he has like 800 episodes for immediate release. So I'll never catch it, but it's certainly a goal.
Right.
Yeah, it's amazing what's happening with the technology that allows us to do shows just like this. So for those of you out there, check out Mike's website and mine. Thank you so much for watching. Mike from Team Solutions near Fort Worth, Texas. Thank you so much again for all your brilliant insights. Appreciate it. Thanks again.
All right.
Take care, everybody. Thanks for watching. Have a nice day.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.